Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome back to Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. In this next segment, we're going to hear from a First Nations delegation that traveled to Rome to speak to the Pope about an apology for what happened with the residential schools, and to try to get the records that are being kept by the Catholic Church about which children were actually housed in the residential schools run by the Catholic Church, and to get a more or less attitude change about what happened during that time. As has been reported in across Canada about how these children were ripped away from their homes, and the goal was to remove the Indian from the Indian. Cultural traditions were banned and outlawed. If too many quote-unquote Indians gathered, there were arrests made or disbursements. A lot of things happened that would discourage the First Nations people from practicing their culture, and lands were taken from them unfairly and under the guise that you're not using it the way it's supposed to be used. And some of these cases, it was a case that you're not a God-fearing people, you don't believe in God, therefore we need to take what you have away from you because you won't follow our rules, you won't follow our culture, you won't follow our beliefs. Massive acts of what is now called colonialism, discrimination, and also genocide were committed during the times that led to residential schools, and responsibility needs to be put forward so that we all can heal from what happened. We all can move forward with the respect that is due all people and all cultures. So let's listen to what was said at this press conference in Rome as the First Nations delegation attempts to address the Pope in Rome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our briefing this afternoon, focusing on the Assembly of First Nations following their meeting with Pope Francis earlier today. My name is Neil McCarthy. I'm the communications lead for the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops for the delegation here in Rome. We'd like to thank all of those who are with us in the room for joining us, and of course, all those who are watching via live stream back home for being with us here this afternoon. The format for this briefing will be slightly different than those from Monday, and the AFN has asked me to give you a brief overview of how things will unfold with the press briefing. So in just a moment, we will begin the briefing with prayer. Following the prayer, I will introduce those who are seated on stage. They will provide their reflections, and then we will take a moment to bring some additional delegates forward for brief remarks, and then we'll have our question period. And then we will conclude the briefing with a song. So this time I would invite Elder Fred Kelly, spiritual advisor, to come forward and lead us in prayer.
Mi question today, Morgan, it took. Je vois ça, ma condition, because Jean d'Autain, Niveteo. I was just giving you my spiritual identity, our traditional people. That's all they need to know about me, and then they can determine what that means. Before I do the opening invocation, I would like to take the couple moments over here to congratulate the leaders who made their presentations so eloquently and so illuminating and illustrious. I also want to acknowledge our elders who have come here carrying the wisdom of the ages from the different nations of our peoples on Turtle Island, the rich diversity of languages, lifeways, and cultures, as we call them in the mainstream. And it is appropriate that I also acknowledge the fact, if we're in for truth and reconciliation, I do not make any political statements. I'm here as a spiritual advisor. But speaking about truth and reconciliation, I spoke to you in my original language, one that was suppressed for quite some time. I'm also thankful and gratitudinous of the opportunity to say my invocation to you in both languages, English and my own language, because that too was suppressed for quite some time. But I'm not going to go into any deep on that. I'm just keeping track, bearing in mind what the backdrop here says, walking toward healing and reconciliation. And so I shall now say my prayer. Tk'emlúps, miigos sabagit niago mamida chabauji tiang. Jivegagi stagoziang oesa huma. Maigi akingi yang oasa gai fonja ya watagoe anedgagi fotosuat. Oesa geget badorchaje menaji huichindiat. I offer my invocations, Great Spirit, to you to look kindly upon us on this happy occasion when our people, the beautiful people of Turtle Island, representing different cultures, different ways, to come and meet with the people whose ancestors sailed across the waters over which we flew. And as I mentioned to His Holiness this morning, the vision unfolded over his head, whereby the eagle that looks after our lands and our peoples met and flew together with the white dove that flew upon Christianity, and especially as noted by the Catholic Church. I respect all religions, I respect all spiritualities. So it is an honor to acknowledge the one Creator, to which there are many paths, but yet they all lead to that one. And so I acknowledge the Creator. Thank you very much for allowing us to be here with these beautiful people, the beautiful messages, the recipients of these messages, that they will spread the word in the four directions of our people, that it be heard in the four skies and the four earths, and that peace and reconciliation do in fact take place. My dear God, dear Creator, Tk'emlúps, miigos.
Thank you so much, Elder Kelly. At this time, I'd like to introduce those who are on the stage with us this afternoon who will be sharing brief remarks. To my left, we welcome Regional Chief Gerald Antoine, who is leading the Assembly of First Nations delegation here to Rome. To his left, we welcome Kukpi7 Rosanne Casimir. Next, we welcome Grand Chief Mandy Gull Masty. We are also pleased to welcome Youth Delegate Rosalie LaBillois. Finally, representing the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, we have Archbishop Richard Smith and Bishop Raymond Poisson. So again, thank you all for being with us, and at this time I'd like to hand things over to Regional Chief Antoine to share his remarks.
Masi, kamasi jo sanan agajane on, katse jushun de dai jushun se masi ne de sinata. Ka jo sheheda se shehera yu jang de da, eji ga jo sete de zo mu hleu zete ga go. Ka ti da senda ze ti ga go da, eji shi masi ne de sinata. Just to share with you, for those people that haven't been taught my language, bonjour and hello. It's good to see each one of you today, and thank you for being here. Thank you for a special day that we've been given, and also the breath of life that we all been given today. There's some things that have unfolded for both of us, and it's something that we need to talk about. And that's why this is a special day today that's been given to us. Earlier on today, after our visit with the Holy Father, when we were there, just to introduce the meeting between ourselves and the Holy Father, I explained and I illustrated a very special piece, a masterpiece. In the Sistine Chapel, there's a drawing right in the middle of the roof, and it's right in the ceiling up there, right in the middle. You have an image, painting of two people putting their hand together like this. And what I saw there and how I feel today is that we're at that particular point. And it is the work of divine powers that allow us to be able to come together at this point to truthfully share a story from our own lens. And I'd like to thank the people over here to allow us to be able to visit and also to be able to talk to one of your representatives, Pope Francis. So, as I've shared with you just briefly, I am Gerald Antoine, and my spirit name is Dene First, which means the man that calls a loon. I wanted to share some things with you just to begin opening our press conference. I have amazing people here with me, amazing members of my family here with me that will simply and also elegantly, preciously, sacredly share with you how they see things. The First Nation delegation that's sitting here with us and on the podium here would like to express our deepest gratitude to His Holiness, Pope Francis, and also the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops that come from our home across the ocean, for supporting and facilitating our presence at this audience. It's a very special day. It is also a truly historical milestone in the journey of our original nation of families. And it's also a milestone for the journey of reconciliation, which the Catholic Church is going to be journeying us on. We very much hope that these discussions will be the beginning of continued dialogue and partnership in which we can learn from the past and share our vision for a hopeful future. The people that I've been leading here, I am extremely proud of how they came with me and how they worked with me and also how they presented the messages to the Holy Father. Our delegation is comprised of First Nation representatives from every region. It includes residential school survivors, family members of survivors, leaders, elders, youth, and also spiritual advisors from several different nations. As the original nation of families, our culture and also our spirituality are fundamental to our identity and our relationships with each other as well as with Mother Earth. In this way, we have lots of things and many things to offer humanity. It is with this common grounding in faith that we meet to discuss the origins and also the impacts of the residential school, and also how we can move forward in a positive way to create a path which will help us to go forward, which will address the legacy of this residential school and also the origins of that. And we're hoping that it will bring about reconciliation, dignity, respect, trust, healing, and justice for our original nation of families. So today it's a very special divine moment, and I have other people here with me that I would like to introduce. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my fellow Chief, Kukpi7 Rosanne Casimir.
Thank you for the introduction, Regional Chief Antoine. Very much appreciated. So for over 100 years, our peoples have been dealing with the devastating impacts of residential school system. Generations of First Nations families have grappled with the lasting trauma of having their children taken away to institutions, which strip them of their Indigenous identities, culture, language, and where many suffered severe forms of abuse. We cannot allow the trauma and abuse our peoples have suffered at residential schools to continue, to impact our future generations. We must chart a new and positive course based upon revitalization and reclamation of our identity, culture, laws, and spirituality. The United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the period 2022 to 2032 as the International Decade of the Indigenous Languages. So during the International Decade, global attention on the critical situation of many Indigenous languages will be raised at international, regional, and national levels, and resources will be mobilized for the preservation, the revitalization, and promotion of Indigenous languages. We urge the Catholic Church to acknowledge its role in residential schools and the loss of Indigenous languages, and to join us by actively supporting us with human and financial resources for the revitalization and promotion of our languages and culture as a foundation for reconciliation and healing. Since the first delegations audience with Pope Benedict in 2009, significant progress has been made with respect to greater understanding of the legacy of residential schools and how Canada can rebuild the relationship with First Nations. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada published its final report, and with it made 94 calls to action for reconciliation between Canada and Indigenous peoples. The mandate of the TRC was to document the history and lasting impacts of the residential school system on Indigenous students and their families, and provided residential school survivors with an opportunity to share their experience during public and private meetings held across the country. The TRC emphasized the need to educate the public about the impacts of residential schools and established the 10 principles for the truth and reconciliation. There are 10 principles, which affirms that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is the framework for the path to reconciliation. The 10 principles emphasize that reconciliation is a process of healing relationships that requires truth, sharing, apology, and commemoration that acknowledges and redresses past harms. Greater commitment is needed for the full implementation of all 94 calls to action. As we begin the journey to reconciliation, it is vital that the Catholic Church and First Nations peoples have the opportunity to share the truth of the past and for the Church to apologize for the wrongs that have been committed and to commemorate the strength and the resilience of First Nations peoples who have suffered because of the residential school system. On September 30th, 2021, Canada recognized the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Orange shirts and flags with the message, "Every Child Matters," were displayed during many marches, commemorations, and ceremonies held across the country and attended by First Nations and non-First Nations peoples alike. There was an outpouring of support from all Canadians who are learning about the truths of what occurred at the residential schools and the lasting impacts these institutions have had. This first commemoration of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was particularly poignant given the recent discovery of unmarked graves of children found at former residential school sites. This has been a very difficult time for so many First Nations people as we seek to find the truth of what happened to our children, our loved ones, our family, and community members who never returned home from the residential schools. It has reminded us that there is still much truth to be uncovered and even greater healing that is needed. It will take many years to assess the impact of the discovery of the unmarked graves that will have on each of us. Many First Nations have just started the process of undertaking ground-penetrating radar and searches and conducting investigations of grave sites. Our loved ones buried in these graves must be identified and returned and embraced by their homelands, their communities, and their families. There is a significant role the Catholic Church can play in assisting in the return of our children by supporting the disclosure of records and documents in its possession. Access to all of the records and documents will help to identify our children and may bring closure and healing to the many families and communities whom for so long have grieved the loss of their loved ones without knowing the truth of what happened. As our communities continues to search for their loved ones, our peoples are re-experiencing the trauma that residential schools have been inflicted. There is an increased and urgent need for mental health and cultural support. It is imperative that the Catholic Church take responsibility, make amends, and help those who have been hurt by the legacy of residential schools. This necessarily includes making reparations. Redress is needed for individuals to address their own trauma in a positive and healing way. We respectfully ask that the Catholic Church support the path to healing by providing the appropriate redress and reparations to First Nations peoples. Every child matters. And now I will introduce Grand Chief Mandy Gull.
Aguni Mandy Gull, Chelsmakan, Ushit Nochin, Mishanu Wajemadi Yud. Thank you, Regional Chief. Thank you, Kukpi. I would like to first take a moment to acknowledge one of our delegates who is not able to be with us today, Marlene Thomas from Prince Edward Island. We wish her well in her recovery. Unfortunately, Marlene fell ill. I'd also like to thank Bishop Smith and Bishop Poisson for joining us today. Before I begin, I would like to explain the purpose of these snowshoes that are here. In Cree language, they're called samaj. My youth Grand Chief traveled with these snowshoes to show that our culture and our language is still alive and still practiced. Many of our children take their first snowshoe walk guided by our elders. These snowshoes were handmade by Elder Saunders Wishchi from the Cree territory. I'd like to express my thanks to him. I'd also like to quote my youth Grand Chief, Adrian Niposh Gunner, who wishes to present these snowshoes as a gift to the Pope, not to glorify him, but to remind him that we are still here and that our Cree culture and our language still lives. Je vais livrer une portion de mon message en français pour les nations autochtones de Québec. J'aimerais vous dire bonjour. L'action 58 du Commission de vérité et réconciliation demande le pape de présenter une excuse aux survivants, leurs familles et leurs communautés pour les actions de l'Église catholique romaine dans leur rôle des actions spirituelles, culturelles, émotionnelles, physiques et sexuelles, formes d'abus contre les nations autochtones, les Inuits et les enfants Métis durant leur temps dans les écoles pensionnements dirigées et aménagées de l'Église catholique. Many pensionnats et survivants ont dit qu'ils ont un désir d'écouter le pape Francis, d'offrir une excuse de la part de l'Église roman-catholique, une excuse qui est nécessaire pour notre guérison et de commencer sur une marche de réconciliation et de regarder la vérité de ce qui s'est passé dans ces écoles. De aussi livrer de la justice pour les Premières Nations. Une excuse de l'Église pour les choses qui sont passées. Les choses, ça va nous démontrer de l'acceptance de leur part, d'ouvrir la porte pour guérison et aussi pour réconciliation. We wish to express our gratitude for His Holiness Pope Francis's commitment to visiting Canada in the new year. We wish to invite him to visit former residential school sites, meet with First Nations survivors, families, leaders, and provide an apology to our people. A meaningful apology that will not only include acknowledgement of the harms done by the Catholic Church, but also an admission of responsibility. This will also demonstrate the Catholic Church's commitment to plan for action in partnership with First Nations people. While forgiveness is a personal choice, we cannot ignore the power of an apology and the act of forgiveness that demonstrates compassion, in which we are able to show that we are transforming anger and hurt into a healing process of peace, love, and freedom. An apology is necessary to repair the relationship between First Nations people and the Catholic Church. We hope that the Catholic Church will support this process of transformation in its relationships with First Nations, and as a first step, offer the words of an apology so that many of our people can hear, "I am sorry." As First Nations people, we believe that we must work together to build a better world for our future generations. We think 7 generations ahead, and we wish to ensure that our actions will benefit our children's children. We envision a world where our communities have healed from trauma of the past and embrace the future with capacity and resources to overcome the many challenges that our people face. Our children and our youth, as emerging leaders, are truly our legacy to the world. We need the appropriate support to heal from intergenerational trauma created by residential schools. They need to take the necessary actions now to ensure that they will inherit a world which accepts their unique perspectives and embraces their distinct cultures, languages, and spirituality. Our children and youth must grow up in a society where their culture and Indigenous spirituality is not only tolerated, but embraced and uplifted by the same institutions that sought to eliminate them. To initiate this step forward, our delegation has presented the Holy Father with specific items. These included moccasins, a beaded brooch, an eagle feather, a black ash basket, literature, and a cradle board. Of significant importance is the cradle board. It is a symbol of every Indigenous child who went to residential school, and for those who survived, and more importantly, for those who did not return home. The Holy Father has now been tasked with the responsibility to care for this cradle board overnight and to reflect on the messages delivered by our delegates. If he is truthful in his commitment to the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, then he will follow through with our request to return the cradle board to our delegation at the general audience tomorrow. We stated to His Holiness, how you treat this cradle board will demonstrate how you treat our people in the future. By returning the cradle board to the delegation, he will demonstrate his commitment to our people. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Grand Chief, and thank you to Regional Chief Antoine and to Elder Fred Kelly and our spiritual advisors for always guiding us in a good way. I first off would like to acknowledge that I am an intergenerational survivor, and it was an immense honor to be here to accompany our former residential school students along their journey and to hear them speak their truths and to share their messages, and also to be here as a youth delegate, and also to thinking about our time here and our experience. I hope our message continues to echo back home on Turtle Island. Fundamental changes are needed for this to occur in a positive and meaningful way. The TRC called on all faith groups to repudiate the concepts used to justify European sovereignty over Indigenous lands and peoples. Respect for First Nations rights and obligations must be demonstrated through the denunciation and repudiation and the abolishment of all colonial edicts, such as the papal bull doctrines of superiority, including discovery and terra nullius. It is time to shed the destructive influences of outdated doctrines and laws of the past, and for our future generations, embrace an inclusive vision of the future that recognizes and encompasses First Nations rights and obligations as a part of reconciliation. Our strengths as a First Nations people have always been our resiliency, our interconnectedness, and our relationship with Mother Earth, and our deep and abiding spirituality. It is our grounding in our cultures and dedication to building a better future for our people that brings us here today. We want to acknowledge the harm residential schools have caused, heal from the past, and build a new relationship. We want our future generations of First Nations people to understand what happened at residential school, but not carry with them the burden of the trauma residential schools have caused. Residential schools were a dark chapter in our history, but they are not the whole story. Much of our story has yet to be written. When His Holiness Pope Francis travels to Canada, he will no doubt see the legacy of the residential school system and the hurt that it has caused. But he will also see the vibrancy and the richness of our cultures, the strength of our nations, and our commitment to build a better and brighter future for our peoples. We very much hope and implore him to offer an apology and also join us as we begin this new chapter on the path of healing and reconciliation. I come from the Peace and Friendship Treaty area, and my dad would always say, there's no peace and we have yet to find our friends. And I think right now the work that we have done and the work of all those who have come before us, we're really setting that path forward, and we're hoping that our non-Indigenous relatives back home on Turtle Island, hear this message and that it's being echoed within our homelands. And that they begin to accept and honor and respect us as the true and rightful leaders of our homelands. And that they come along with us and learn that love that we have for our land and why we love it so much and the things that we do and how important it is to us. So, Walalio, welcome to Nokma.
So I'm Archbishop Richard Smith, the Archbishop of Edmonton. Pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation to join you at this press briefing. I don't want to take a whole lot of time because that's taking time away from yourselves and your testimonies, and I don't want to do that, but I will take this opportunity simply to offer just a brief reflection on my experience this morning as, I would say, a privileged witness to an historic moment. I'm part of a small group of bishops, together with Bishop Poisson. I've been working together with our Indigenous partners for quite a few years now to get ready for this event. And it has been an honor to be able to facilitate what has taken place this morning and finally to see it actually happen. I'm full of respect for the delegates that came forward after obviously having taken a great deal of time to prepare for this moment and to witness how you came to meet the Holy Father deeply aware of the heavy responsibility that has been entrusted to you by your people to speak and to share with the Holy Father what you felt needed to be said. It was a forthright presentation, a truthful one, and I would say a respectful one. And it was a privilege and a blessing and an honor for me to be participant in that. I would also want to say that I was deeply moved by the response of the Holy Father. It's clear that he listened deeply. It's clear that he wanted this encounter to happen. And it's clear that he himself was profoundly moved by what he heard. And at the end of the day, or at the end of the session, he shared that, look, I've listened to this, I've heard this, it has touched me deeply. And now, as had been requested, he's going to be praying and pondering deeply through the rest of this day and into this evening in preparation for the encounter tomorrow. So thank you for the partnership. Thank you for inviting us into your lives. Thank you for helping us really, and welcoming us to be partners with you on this journey. And I can assure you that I and my brother bishops do want to journey with you. Thank you.
French note. Thank you very much, everyone, for especially for this meeting of this morning. We took time this morning. There's no stress with the agenda. It was very generous from the Holy Father also. And as Archbishop Smith said, it's because you prepare yourself very well for that. So thank you very much. Et je voudrais tout simplement attirer notre attention sur ce climat, l'atmosphère, how it was going this morning. D'abord, la prière, comme nous venons de faire d'ailleurs. Je pense que nous avons beaucoup à apprendre avec vous de la manière de se rencontrer. A prayer together to begin a meeting, that's a spirit between us, different spirit, and it's not the usual way in our modern world, if I can say that. So, deux gestes qui ont été posés qui, il me semble, ce matin se répondaient et qui donnent bien le ton du climat que nous avions. Pour ce qui est des paroles, nous en avons entendu, mais le climat, on a remis au Saint-Père, vous avez remis au Saint-Père de tout petits mocassins, baby shoes. Et ça vient nous redire que nous portons dans cette délégation le souci, le souvenir, la mémoire vivante de ceux et celles pour qui nous sommes ici, avec cette mémoire des écoles résidentielles. Par contre, en même temps, vers la fin du rendez-vous, vous avez remis au Saint-Père une paire de chaussures fait main, mais à sa pointure à lui. Et vous le lui avez dit, that's the good size of shoes for you, Holy Father, because we want you walk with us, que vous puissiez avec nous marcher. Et je pense qu'il l'a très bien compris. Alors merci beaucoup et poursuivons la route.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.